Clinton and Trump win big on Super Tuesday. So is the stage now set for the US presidential election race? Also on today's program, fixing Nigeria's image problem. Is Buhari mending Africa's biggest economy? And in Picture This, returning to Earth. Astronauts land after a year in space. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. It's billed as the blockbuster event of primary season, and this year's Super Tuesday didn't disappoint. Trump marched to victory for the Republicans, while Clinton clinched the top spot for the Democrats. And the battle for the White House between the pair looked even closer to becoming the real deal. The former Secretary of State may have finally put out Bernie Sanders' flame, as the Vermont Senator will be feeling the post-Super Tuesday burn. On the other side of the fence, Trump's presidential fantasy looked one step closer to becoming a reality as he showed his pulling power across states and social divides. Today's newsmakers are these two, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, as we ask if one of them could be moving into the White House next year.
The choice for the next president of the United States is becoming clearer.
This has been an amazing evening.
Thank you, Texas!
The biggest day in the battle for candidates saw the gap between hopefuls widen.
That would be a disaster for Republicans.
It's not just about electing a president, it is about transforming America.
Donald Trump will be an embarrassment to America.
And the stakes rise.
We're going to make America great again, folks.
America never stopped being great.
Super Tuesday allocates the most delegates in one go, with 13 states and 1 US territory voting.
What a Super Tuesday!
Hillary Clinton left her rival behind, winning 7 states. She also won the territory of American Samoa. Bernie Sanders won 4, although Colorado doesn't select its delegates until April. As it stands, Clinton has 1,001 delegates, almost half of the 2,383 needed to win the nomination, while Sanders has 371. The winning streak continued for Donald Trump. He took 7 states, while his nearest rival Ted Cruz won 3, including Texas, which had the most delegates up for grabs. The next closest hopeful, Marco Rubio, took just 1 state. Trump now has 285 delegates, Cruz 161, and Rubio 87. Republicans need 1,237 delegates to win the nomination. With Trump streaking ahead of his Republican rivals, Ted Cruz has called for the others to bow out.
That our campaign is the only campaign that has beaten, that can beat, and that will beat Donald Trump.
It now seems likely the battle for the White House will be fought between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
Chris, thank you very much.
And the rhetoric has already shifted, sounding more like a presidential race.
The stakes in this election have never been higher. And the rhetoric we're hearing on the other side has never been lower.
The tone of Donald Trump's victory speech was more measured than his usual style.
I am a unifier. Once we get all of this finished, I'm going to go after one person. That's Hillary Clinton.
5 more states will vote for their preference later this week, but the outcome of Super Tuesday seems to have set the stage for a Clinton-Trump presidential face-off. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss Clinton and Trump's Super Tuesday triumphs is Raul Reyes. He's an attorney, journalist, and TV commentator in New York. And in Washington, D.C. is Christopher Barron, an American political activist and co-founder of GO Proud. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Christopher Barron, let me start with you. This is all seeming like a foregone conclusion with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Christopher, as a Republican, would you be comfortable with Trump as your candidate?
Absolutely not. And the reason I wouldn't be comfortable is because I'm a conservative, and frankly, Donald Trump is not a conservative. I think at the end of the day, yesterday was a very, very good day for Mr. Trump. There's no way to spin that. Anybody out there who's telling you something differently is simply not being true. It was a very bad day for the Republican Party, and in particular, it was a very bad day for conservatives. We're watching a hostile takeover of the Republican Party by a reality TV star who frankly holds positions that are a complete and total anathema to most conservatives in this country.
Well, let me put the same question then to Raul. As a Democrat, would you be comfortable with Hillary Clinton as your candidate?
Yes, sir. But I would like to add that at this point, although Super Tuesday has tremendous significance because of the number of delegates and all of the states involved, even on the Democratic side, the race is far from over. And one big reason for that is that Bernie Sanders is sitting upon so much money. He raised, in February alone, I believe he raised $41 million. Just on Monday night, he raised $6 million. So as long as he has won a few contests, he can keep going on to states like Michigan and California. He has the funds to keep doing that because these are the states that are likely to favor him. So he's going forward. He's certainly leading a movement of millennials and young people who are not at all ready to give up.
Isn't his momentum deflated after the Super Tuesday losses, Raul? I mean, individual donors tend to dry up after defeat. When you don't have institutional money behind you, the individuals stop giving money, right?
Right. Well, I would say yes and no. In a traditional campaign, absolutely yes, that's what happens. But this year, 2016, the race has been so unpredictable and volatile. We've, just as we've never seen someone like Donald Trump on the Republican side, we have never seen someone like Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. And you have to remember, this is someone, he's been in Congress 30 years, but most Americans have really never heard of him until just a few months ago. He seemingly came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden he has hundreds of thousands of ordinary Americans giving him an average, I believe, of $27, and that's what's powering his campaign. If he were a traditional candidate, after the results of last night, he might be talking about winding down his campaign, but he's not a traditional candidate. He still has the money, the excitement to go on, so I think he's going to stay in the game longer.
You're sounding very hopeful, even though Hillary Clinton's looking awfully strong at the moment. Talking about these non-traditional candidates, let's go back to Donald Trump. Christopher, after Donald Trump refused to disavow the former KKK leader, David Duke, we had Speaker Paul Ryan come out and go, "We are the party of Abraham Lincoln." And the Republicans are now saying this guy has nothing to do with us, and they're calling him all sorts of names. But even if they wanted to now, the wild horse has bolted, hasn't it? Did they mess up in a big way by not finding a way to, I guess, get rid of him, carrying the brand of the Republican Party? Did they support the likes of Jeb Bush for way too long? What do you think? Where did they go wrong?
Well, I think lots of people went wrong here. First off, I think establishment Republicans went wrong because they assumed, wrongfully, that Donald Trump was simply going to implode. They thought that he would collapse on his own. They vastly underestimated Mr. Trump, and quite frankly, they vastly underestimated the anger within the Republican Party and the base of the Republican Party itself. And secondly, the kind of talk wing of the Republican, the talk radio wing of the Republican Party propped Donald Trump up for too long. The Rush Limbaughs and Laura Ingrams and Fox Newses of the world pushed Donald Trump out there early on because he drove ratings. And now, now the monster is out of his cage, and there's no putting him back in it.
Is he the type of guy, if he was running as a Democrat, he'd be championing universal health care and the Black Lives Matter movement? Is that the type of guy Donald Trump is, which suggests that perhaps he's going to do a lot of adjusting during a presidential race?
Well, this is speculation on my part, but I would tend to agree yes, because for most of his life, Donald Trump was a Democrat. Donald Trump gave to Democratic candidates. Hillary Clinton went to the wedding of Donald Trump's, at least one of Donald Trump's children. So for most of his life, he wasn't even a traditional Republican at all. And we have heard him already espouse certain positions that are anathema to Republicans. Donald Trump says that Planned Parenthood does tremendous work. He supports it, which most Republican candidates do not. He has said that there's some room for negotiation on immigration because he says he's a businessman. That's what he does. He's a negotiator. And also on trade deals, he said he's open to negotiating from some of the positions that he staked out earlier. But because he's such a non-traditional politician, it's hard to gauge where he's going to go.
Christopher Barron, it seems as if Kasich and Carson are almost creating unnecessary congestion and they should just get out of this race to simplify it for everybody else. But what about Cruz and Rubio? Do you think maybe they need to perhaps both swallow their pride and run together if they really want the party to trump Trump?
I mean, maybe they should, but I don't think they will. I mean, the fact is, at this point, if you're Marco Rubio, you have just a good path forward as Senator Ted Cruz does. And so there's absolutely no incentive for Rubio to get out now. There's no incentive for Ted Cruz to get out here. And I think what a lot of people forget here is that, you know, Ted Cruz is also a candidate who is largely distrusted and disliked by the Republican establishment. At the end of the day, you're not going to see the establishment rallying around Ted Cruz. They're just as likely to rally around Donald Trump, which is why you've seen congressional endorsements, you know, gubernatorial endorsements, even a Senate endorsement for Donald Trump in the last couple of weeks. And I wanted to make one point about what kind of candidate Donald Trump would be in the fall. Donald Trump's a good businessman. I'll give him that. He sells whatever he thinks people want to buy. In this primary, he's been selling one brand of politics because he thinks it's popular with Republican voters. When we get to the fall, he's going to sell something completely and totally different.
Christopher, this election campaign has not been short of surprises. I wonder, is it likely that someone like Michael Bloomberg can maybe rock up as an independent candidate sometime soon? There's been speculation of that.
I don't think it'll be a Bloomberg type, because I think for a Bloomberg candidacy, it required somebody like Bernie Sanders winning the Democratic nomination. I do think you're going to, if Donald Trump is the nominee, and I believe he will be the nominee, I think you're going to see a conservative running as an independent. There's been a lot of talk recently about Mitt Romney, and obviously Mitt Romney is somebody who wants to be president very badly. He's somebody with deep pockets. He's somebody the establishment and big donors trust. When we talk about the matchup in November, it's not going to simply be a race between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Conservatives are not going to sit on the sideline and let Donald Trump simply walk away with the Republican Party. There will be a conservative running as an independent in November.
Raul, how does Hillary Clinton move forward now? How does she adjust her dial on the campaign trail in the next few months?
Well, I think we saw a little bit of how Hillary Clinton is going to adjust last night. When she gave her victory speech, she was very inclusive. She used a lot of the same type of language that Bernie Sanders used, talking about income inequality and talking about how all people need to move forward together and talking about how all Americans deserve equal economic opportunity. Those are typically lines associated with Mr. Sanders. So she's sort of taking some pages from his playbook. And it was also interesting to me in her speech, she very subtly, she did not criticize Donald Trump directly, and yet she laid out herself as a contrast to Donald Trump. She talked about being inclusive. She actually said that she wants to be the candidate of love and kindness, which you don't often hear from a presidential nominee. She talked about how we needed to go back to our traditional values of family and taking care of each other and optimism. These are all things that traditionally in a presidential campaign are a little absent, because our politics here, as you know, can be sort of rough and tumble. But I think she's trying to appeal to people's optimism. What Donald Trump has been very successful about, and I want to remind viewers of this, he has been stoking a lot of the fear that people in this country feel, particularly among the Republican base. And when we look back over his campaign up to now, I hope it's going to be a different campaign. As Christopher mentioned, I hope it's going to be a different type of campaign, because up to now, he has insulted Mexicans, immigrants, Muslims, women, disabled people, veterans, his fellow politicians, journalists, and many other groups. So it's almost, it would seem staggering that he would hope to go forward with this type of campaign. And yet, as Christopher pointed out, that is what has worked for him, unfortunately.
Okay, gentlemen, unfortunately, I've got to wrap, but this was fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us, Raul Reyes and Christopher Barron. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, nearly 12 months after a historic election, is Nigeria any better off? And in Picture This, welcome home, Earthlings. Astronauts touch down after spending a year in space. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is visiting his Nigerian counterpart, Muhammadu Buhari, to deepen bilateral ties. Buhari won the presidency in a historic election for Nigeria, the first democratic transfer of power in the country's history. But nearly a year on from that victory, some in Nigeria feel he hasn't delivered on his promises to defeat the country's Boko Haram insurgency and eliminate corruption from government. Jerome Evans reports.
Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation and richest economy. Oil was the fuel that fired the country's economic boom. But with oil prices falling fast, Nigeria now finds itself facing an economic crisis. The government of Muhammadu Buhari, elected 1 year ago on a promise to fight corruption, has vowed to crack down on people who use public money to line their own pockets. One strategy has been a war on so-called ghost workers. The government has uncovered nearly 24,000 people who do not exist, but are drawing salaries. They've been struck off the payroll, making a saving of $11 million a month. But some say it's not enough.
There's so much waste, there's so much theft that goes on within that space. So that's where the challenge is. And I think if he can set that right, which I think it's not doing right enough, he's not doing well enough. If he can set that right, that we can have a more transparent, a more accountable system for public funds.
Nigeria's finance ministry says keeping a tight hold on the national purse strings will boost the country's budget at a time when state coffers are depleted. Nigeria is also looking to diversify its economy. It's trying to form new links with trade partners, including Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met Muhammadu Buhari on Wednesday. He's accompanied by a trade delegation looking out for business opportunities. But with opportunity comes risk. Africa's largest economy faces a number of problems: high inequality, poor infrastructure, and raging insurgency in the northeast. Boko Haram wants to create a caliphate centered around the town of Maiduguri. Since 2009, it's been battling government forces. The armed groups killed more than 17,000 people, destroyed more than 1,000 schools, and more than 1.5 million have been displaced. Muhammadu Buhari claims that during the height of the insurgency, funds earmarked for fighting Boko Haram were stolen by corrupt officials. Nigeria's problems of corruption, poverty, inequality, and security are all connected. And observers say fighting them in isolation won't work. So the new president faces an uphill struggle to change the face of Nigeria and repair the country's international reputation. Jerome Evans, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss if Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari's promises are fading is African affairs analyst, journalist and author Charles Anyagolu. He's in London. Thanks for joining us, Charles. So you're grading the report card. Give us some marks out of 10 for Muhammadu Buhari.
Well, first of all, I think Jerome Evans's report there was an excellent way to get into this discussion. It sort of sums up what's going on in the country, and it's very difficult to score President Buhari in terms of a report card of something like 1 to 10, because, I mean, Nigeria is besieged with so many problems. I mean, it's almost impossible for one head of state, one president, to come in and be able to sort out that problem. But having said that, on the issues that he's made sort of his, target, things like corruption, I think most Nigerians would score him quite high. The problem, of course, is that there are two types of corruption. There's the corruption of greed, which he's gone after, and there's the corruption of need, which is much more pervasive, which he's not been able to touch. But on that score, he's certainly making the right noises and the right overtures. And I think most people in Nigeria would say that they are impressed with the first tentative steps he's taking in that direction.
Yeah, looking at some of the stats here, he's axed 50 top civil servants, 40 ambassadors, 24,000 ghost employees, people who didn't show up to work but were picking up their paychecks. And this is saving Nigeria about $12 million per month. That's gutsy, right? He's used a blowtorch to fight corruption. Isn't he afraid of blowback, where you have disgruntled people who've lost their jobs who might get together and try and get rid of him?
Well, that's a very good point, because, of course, you've got the establishment, and the establishment in Nigeria is notorious for its official criminality. That has gone on for decades, and they're extremely difficult to dislodge. Having said that, President Buhari was a former military dictator. He's been in the annals of power, sort of the corridors of power in Nigeria. He knows exactly the sort of people to go after, and he's not afraid to do it at all. So, yes, there's the potential for, people, sort of getting together and saying we're going to get rid of him, but they can't do that for at least the next 4 years. So that gives him a little bit of time to start to consolidate his position in that direction. And if he's able to do it well, as the elections proved, ordinary Nigerians who are supporting him quite robustly this time are likely to vote him back in again. The fact, of course, is that he can't do it all in one term.
And now finally, Boko Haram. I mean, pound for pound, matching them up against even Daesh. When you look at pure or sheer death toll, they've recently killed more people than Daesh have. It's an incredible insurgency. And it seems to be like a game of whack-a-mole, where you put them down here and they pop up somewhere else. Are you confident that he can eliminate the threats of Boko Haram?
Well, the government's answer will be that you cannot completely eliminate every single element within Boko Haram, but their argument is that they have managed to decimate the group, neutralize them to the point where they are containable. They no longer have caliphate ambitions because they don't have the capacity to, to carry out such an ambition. So what they do now is, carrying out sort of attacks here and there, suicide bomb attacks and so on, in a kind of disparate way, but that in terms of what they were previously, the threat they constituted to the Nigerian state, because at the time they had territorial ambitions, the government will say that that is no longer possible. Now, we will, of course, have to wait and see as the months sort of progress to see whether or not that, in fact, is the case. But certainly, factually on the ground, the number of attacks from Boko Haram have, reduced considerably, and it's no longer the sort of wanton, indiscriminate, bold attacks that you used to have, where sort of dozens and perhaps even hundreds of gunmen would go and attack a city for several hours. I mean, they're doing it in a much more disparate manner now, and so to that extent, that may well buttress the government's point that it's managed to bring it down to a containable level.
Thank you very much for joining us, Charles Anyagolu in London. In today's Picture This, 3 astronauts have returned safely to Earth after a year-long mission to the International Space Station. Their stay, which was more than double the length of a normal space visit, was part of a study to measure the long-term effects of space travel on the human body. Let's take a look. Today's newsmakers have been Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. The duo are already drawing battle lines in the race to the White House, but neither of them did quite enough to kick their rivals into touch. Bernie Sanders has vowed to fight on, and he has the cash in his war chest to continue campaigning against Clinton. In the GOP camp, Cruz has prayerfully requested the other candidates stand down so that he has a fighting chance against Trump. But the property tycoon looks set to tower over the others. Super Tuesday 2016 has certainly set the stage for the presidential race, but the final act is by no means over. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.